Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you think back to the history you learned in school, we're taught the foundations of human civilization, the Greeks, the Romans, the dynasties of Europe and Asia. But what if I told you that absolutely crucial pieces of human history have been systematically left out of our foundational understanding of the world? That there's this massive, gaping void in the story of human achievement that you probably aren't even aware of. Well, today we're reclaiming that narrative. We are digging into the forgotten giants of history. 3 of the greatest, most advanced empires that ever existed.
It's kind of crazy to think about, right? But before Europe built its very first universities, and honestly, long before the Roman Empire even reached its peak, Africa didn't just have small villages or scattered tribes. It had sprawling, unimaginably wealthy empires. We're talking about highly organized governments, written laws, vast libraries, and kings whose names literally echoed across 3 continents. So how did we just lose track of them? To understand the erasure, we first have to understand the sheer, magnificent scale of what was actually erased.
So, let's dive into our first forgotten giant, the Kingdom of Kush, also known as the Iron Masters of the Nile.
Now here's where we have to totally flip what we think we know on its head. When I say the word pyramid, your brain probably goes straight to Egypt, right? Totally natural. But the truth is, the modern-day country of Sudan actually contains way more pyramids than Egypt, and they were built by the spectacular Kingdom of Kush, a civilization that existed right alongside ancient Egypt. Over 200. Just let that number sink in for a second. The Kushite capital city of Meroe features more than 200 narrow, striking pyramids rising right out of the golden sand. That is more pyramids in this single Kushite region than all the Egyptian pyramids combined. And these weren't just simple copycats either. They were incredible architectural wonders in their own right, serving as the resting places for Kushite royalty.
Looking at the timeline, history books usually skip this next part. Prior to 750 BCE, Kush and Egypt mostly coexisted. They traded, they learned from each other. But around 750 BCE, the Kingdom of Kush didn't just compete with Egypt, it completely conquered it. A Kushite king named Pae marched his army north and took total control. For nearly a century, the pharaohs of Egypt were African kings from Kush, establishing what's known as the 25th dynasty, or the Black Pharaohs, and they deeply respected Egyptian culture, restoring ancient temples rather than destroying them.
But it wasn't just military muscle. Their true economic power came from technology, specifically iron. The capital, Meroe, became a premier center of iron production for the ancient world. They were churning out iron tools, iron weapons, and advanced agricultural equipment. While much of Europe was still literally living in the Stone Age, the Kingdom of Kush was a bustling hub of advanced iron technology, supplying the wider ancient world. They were absolute titans.
But around 350 CE, one great empire was replaced by another, which brings us to empire number 2, the Empire of Aksum, a literal global superpower.
Located in modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, Aksum wasn't just playing on a regional level. They were ranked as one of the 4 greatest powers on Earth, standing shoulder to shoulder with Rome, Persia, and China. Why? Because they absolutely dominated the crucial Red Sea trade corridor for 700 years. They were the ultimate middlemen. They exported ivory, gold, and frankincense, imported silk and glass, and dealt directly with Rome, Arabia, India, and Persia. The entire ancient global economy practically flowed through their hands.
And with an economy that massive, you need a highly sophisticated way to manage it. So, starting in 270 CE, Aksum began minting its own gold coins. This is a massive, game-changing leap in economic development. While the vast majority of the world was still relying on bartering, trading a goat for a sack of grain, Aksum had an advanced monetary system, stamping the faces of their kings right on a gold currency.
They were also brilliant engineers. The Aksumites carved towering stone obelisks directly from single massive pieces of rock. 30 meters. Imagine carving a single block of stone 30 meters tall. To give you a sense of just how significant these structures are, one of these giant obelisks was actually stolen by Italian colonizers in 1937 and taken all the way to Rome. It took over 70 years, but it was finally returned to Ethiopia in 2008.
But Aksum's most enduring legacy might actually be religious. Looking back at their timeline,
there's a pivotal shift in 330 CE. King Azana makes a massive decision and converts to Christianity. This made Aksum one of the very first Christian kingdoms in the entire world. Think about that. An African empire adopted Christianity decades before it ever became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This planted the roots for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is still one of the oldest Christian institutions on earth today.
Eventually, trade routes shifted, and Aksum declined. Fast forward in history, and we meet our third forgotten giant, the Mali Empire, a civilization defined by gold, salt, and scholars. Stretching across modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, and beyond, this state possessed unparalleled wealth. At its peak, the Mali Empire controlled more than half of the entire world's gold supply, which leads us straight to their emperor, Mansa Musa. Adjusted for inflation, his estimated modern-day wealth sits at around $400 billion. He wasn't just the richest man of his era, he is widely considered the wealthiest individual in all of human history, period.
To truly grasp that absurd level of wealth, just look at the scale of his 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled with an entourage of 60,000 people. He brought 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. In fact, when his caravan passed through Cairo, Mansa Musa was so casually generous, handing out so much gold, that he accidentally caused massive inflation. One guy, on a religious trip, single-handedly destabilized the entire Egyptian economy for a decade.
But here is the thing. Mali wasn't just some giant vault of gold. Its intellectual legacy is just as staggering. The city of Timbuktu housed the University of Sankore, which boasted an incredible 25,000 students. To put that academic capacity into perspective, at that exact same time, Oxford University in England was barely 200 years old and significantly smaller. Mali was a premier global intellectual hub.
Scholars were literally flocking from all across the Islamic world to study in Mali. They were diving into astronomy, advanced mathematics, medicine, and complex law. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were produced and stored in Timbuktu. And the most beautiful part, many of these texts still exist today, actively preserved in underground vaults by local families who know exactly how precious they are.
So, we've got iron masters who conquered Egypt, a global superpower minting gold, and a medieval empire boasting the richest guy in history and a massive university. Which begs a really frustrating, glaring question. If these empires were so undeniable, why are they missing from our collective memory? Why didn't we learn about them?
Well, that brings us to a darker era, the colonial erasure and the rewriting of history.
The short answer is the European colonialism of the 18th and 19th centuries. When European powers colonized the African continent, they didn't just extract physical resources like gold and diamonds. They intentionally extracted narrative. To justify conquering foreign lands, historians of the era actively portrayed the continent as lacking civilization or history. It's simple, right? It's easier to justify taking from people if you convince the world they're primitive. So, they literally dismissed physical evidence. They claimed those 200 pyramids in Sudan must have been built by outsiders. They claimed Timbuktu's manuscripts were just wild exaggerations. They actively chose not to see the truth.
And here is why this matters to us right now. Colonialism might have officially ended, but its narrative legacy absolutely did not. That intentional historical rewriting was baked right into textbooks and woven into school curriculums globally. And that is exactly why these towering civilizations remain forgotten giants in our classrooms today. We're all inheriting a deliberately cropped photograph of human history.
But here is the good news. Reclaiming our history. Because at the end of the day, the stones are still there.
The rewriting failed because you simply cannot erase physical reality. The 30-meter obelisks of Aksum still pierce the sky, the gold coins are still in the archives, the 700,000 manuscripts of Mali are currently being digitized. Think about the emotional power of uncovering this. Imagine a young student in Sudan finally learning their ancestors outbuilt Egypt, or someone in Ethiopia realizing they descend from a global superpower. When you learn your true history, your identity shifts, your sense of what is possible completely transforms.
It really all boils down to this fundamental truth.
Identity is built on story. And for too long, a large part of the world has been living with an incomplete story. That is exactly why this explainer matters. History isn't just about memorizing dates in the past, it's the very foundation of how we see ourselves. Resurrecting these forgotten empires is absolutely essential to making our human story whole again.
Kush, Aksum, Mali. We've uncovered just 3 stories today that were almost lost. But it leaves us with one final, totally undeniable question. What else is hiding in the missing chapters of human history? I mean, what about the massive stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, or the sheer military might of the Songhai Empire? The history of the world is so much bigger, richer, and more fascinating than what fits in a standard textbook. So keep questioning.